related topic. So I thought about today to try to condensate in 3 pillars some thoughts about the current situation. So one is why we believe this is the first truly global energy crisis. The second element is what about for Europe, the winter that is coming and beyond, so the following winter and maybe beyond. And the third is to share some views on what could be the prospects beyond this crisis. So starting from the very first point is why we believe this is an unprecedented global energy crisis. There are many reasons, but first of all, in the past we had something like the one in the 70s, which created a significant economic turmoil, inflation and problems. But at that time, it was just about oil. Today is oil, is gas, is electricity, and beyond. So what we are seeing today is unprecedented. The second reason is because the root of this crisis, the responsible of this crisis in our view has a name and a surname, who is Russian Federation. A Russian Federation was not until 24 of February a normal country in the energy scene. It was a cornerstone of the global energy picture. Number 1 world oil exporter, number 1 gas exporter of the world. So Russia is not any country when it comes to energy, and of course the implications are going to be, are already massive and severe. The third element is that this crisis takes place in a particular moment, in a moment where we had financial markets moving from a decade of quantitative easing to tightening of policy. We have already, before the crisis erupted, a 40 years high inflation record. And compared to the 70s, other macro indicators like global trade or like the level of debt are much higher. So this crisis erupted is much larger and erupted in a context which is more fragile, and it will have implication for a long time. Now, of course, as you know, there's been, since the crisis, there's been almost a united answer from the Western world about the current situation, and we have seen in Europe a significant decline of Russia dependency. It was almost 40% of the EU gas consumed coming from Russia before the crisis. Today is about 10%. We have seen also a significant decline of reliance on Russian oil in European Union. But of course, this is coming, as it was expected, at a price in a difficult moment. Now, all the attention, and I go to the second point, is about what is going to happen next winter. And here, our messages tend to be slightly positive, or not as pessimistic like we might have read in many newspapers. We have seen, thanks to the measure implemented by EU, by many countries, we have seen a very strong activity to refill our storages. When the crisis erupted, we had the gas storage in the European Union being around 30% full. Today, we are almost 90%, and some countries are above 90%. So when we look at the data, we look at the level of the gas consumption now. If nothing happens, so if there is not any other problem with a major gas infrastructure, if there is no failure of LNG on international market because, for instance, there is an incident in some part of the world. If the winter is not particularly harsh, we believe that this winter can go almost smooth. Maybe some bruise here and there, but almost smooth. Now the question is what happens after. Because when we go through the winter, it will happen that next February, next March, our storages will go from the 90% of today to 25–30% again. So the question is how we are going to refill the storage. Because next year the situation might be very different compared to this year. Number one, a lot of gas that today we have in the storage is Russian. Next year, probably, this will not be the case. Second, a lot of gas we are using is LNG that in a normal year would have gone to China. But China economy suffered a lot this year and has reduced by about 20% its own import of gas. And this has freed up a lot of LNG that, of course, at expensive price, but came to Europe. And the third remaining in LNG is when we look all the investment that has been done in the past, that takes some year to materialize, the amount of new capacity of LNG coming online next year is very modest, only about 20 BCM. So the message here is, maybe this winter can go well, but we do not have to stop to make our homework, because the next one might be even more challenging. Now, the picture is just gloomy, it's just bad. Here I would like to go to the prospect beyond the crisis and try to suggest the things that are happening in Europe, but are also happening outside Europe that could give reason of what we call legitimate optimism. And now when we look is, the picture is the driver to move beyond the fossil fuel before this crisis erupted were, again, very legitimate, mainly climate-driven. Climate change is a massive crisis for our planet. We believe it should be a priority number one in all the discussion and decision taken about energy and energy-related activities. And this was the key driver, climate, to try to decarbonize our system. Today, beside the climate reason, has emerged the energy security reason. The dependence, the deep energy dependence, to the extent we have seen in Russia, on other countries has become a major element of concern for many governments that before were not thinking carefully about it. So beside climate, we have now a second driver, which is security, energy security and national security. And then we have a third driver, which is industrial policies. What we are seeing around the world is a massive momentum of government to try to accelerate what we define as the industry of tomorrow. One key example is US, Inflation Reduction Act. The name is very inappropriate. It seems speaking of something else. But in the US Inflation Reduction Act, you have $400 billion of US government put on the table to stimulate not only the deployment of clean technology, electric vehicles, battery, solar, wind, carbon capture and storage, nuclear, but also to develop the domestic industry. The tax credit, the loans, the grants change if you produce domestically or if an important part of your supply chain is domestic. We have in Europe, of course, Repower EU, which is another very important framework to try to deploy more clean energy across the board. China is the #1 in electric vehicle, in wind, in solar, in nuclear, and is doing this for climate, maybe, and coal, maybe yes, but is doing also this to be the leader of the future in those technologies. So what I'm saying here is what we are seeing outside of this crisis is also that there is a huge momentum of several governments to try to accelerate the shift away from fossil fuel and to deploy clean energy technologies, and to do this not only with climate soul, not only with a security driver, but also with industrial policies for the industry of the future. And I believe this is a key topic that Europe should consider beyond the emergency. We have about, in EU, the 5 gas-intensive sectors: iron and steel, cement, tobacco. These 5 sectors, which are the most responsible of the gas consumption in Europe as far as this industry, employ about 8 million workers, generate about 650 billion of added value per year. And we are not even speaking here of all the associated employer and added value in connected to this sector. So I think it's important for Europe also to look at the emergency today, think about 2023, how to go through that, because it might be even more challenging, but also to jump on this industrial race and industrial competition that is happening around the world, and to try also to look at that to not undermine even more what could be the competitiveness of the industry and the citizens in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alessandro, for this keynote speech. And now let's jump to the Western Balkans, the EU, and the Czech presidency's role in this discussion. Just to note, in the program, which you all have in front of you on your tables, you will see we have 2 panels, and we will immediately open with the first of them. The first panel will be more political, will be mapping the energy crisis and the energy transition of the Western Balkan countries in face of EU policies, and how can the EU best support the Western Balkan countries on their pathways to a clean and sustainable energy system. And then the second panel, which we will have after a coffee break and a family picture, will be dealing more with the business opportunities and the economic implications of this transition, focusing also on the potential for collaboration with Czech companies or other European companies. So let's jump straight into the first panel, and I am very happy that we are here joined with such a high-level set of panelists who, of course, will do their best to answer those questions that we've outlined in the program. And first of them, as was already mentioned, is Mr. Artur Lorkovsky, who is the director of the Energy Community Secretariat. So I believe the best placed person to actually paint us a picture in where we can, in where we are at this point as the European Union vis-a-vis the support for the energy transition of the Western Balkan countries. And what are the outlooks in face of what Alessandra just said, the crisis being immediate and perhaps even prolonged and even perhaps deepened in the upcoming years. So what is your outlook for the energy community's role in this regard? And perhaps if you have any message to the Czech presidency, how could it support those endeavors? Please feel free to convey it. The floor, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, for having me today and for a very kind invitation by the Czech presidency. It's a great honor for the Secretariat to be the guest and seeing many familiar faces. We know each other for ages, I would say, and now we are again during the Czech presidency facing the energy crisis, because that was also the case 10 years ago or 11, 12 years ago, I remember.
30.
No? Yeah?
2009.
Yeah? Yeah. That's what I'm referring to, Václav, very precisely. From the perspective of the energy community, my very deep conviction is that the European Green Deal would not be fully successful without the engagement of the European neighborhood, including, of course, the Western Balkans, but amid the war in Ukraine, I would like to stress from the very beginning that Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, they are also the countries which are covered by the Energy Community Treaty, and having this country on board and having these countries within the framework of the energy communities, especially today, are very great responsibility for not only steering the integration of markets, which is the primary responsibility of the Secretariat and of the process I'm responsible for, but also by opening the markets, transition of energy sectors and decarbonization, but also the way in which the whole energy community is facing today the energy crisis. And I mean, this responsibility is overreaching all of the activities which are being undertaken right now within the framework of the energy community, and I would believe that they will have a very long-standing impact on the activities of the energy community in the future. And this is the message I would like to share with you. And in that context, I deeply believe that the deep decarbonization of and transition of the energy sectors in the countries, especially in the Western Balkans, is a part of the solution in the mid and long term for these countries, for facing and addressing and finding the proper way of addressing the challenges which are very much connected with energy sector. This is also very important because after Moldova and Ukraine have been granted the status of the candidacy countries, or candidacy status of the candidate countries to the European Union, almost all contracting parties of the energy community now are in the parallel way of cooperating with the European Union. The first one is, of course, the energy community, but the second one is the enlargement process, which also having a very important impact on the way how we are operating. I know that in some member states of the contracting parties of the energy community, some expectations are much higher that the process of enlargement could be expedited. However, I think this is what is to be recognized, that we have this parallelism in dealing by the European Union with contracting parties or with the neighborhood of the European Union, having the energy community framework and the process of enlargement at the same time. The energy community is not a novelty, I would say. It has been created in 2005, and the role is actually to export the way in which the energy markets are being managed in the European Union to the European neighborhood. So we are extending the tested and well-established regulatory frameworks existing in the European Union to the neighborhood in energy, in environment, and that is the most recently development also in climate. And I think this is also a very important message for the potential investors, because this extension of the European frameworks with some enforcement mechanism which are given to the Energy Community Secretariat, it creates a kind of level playing field for them to make investments in the neighboring countries, but also give a certain level of security by de-risking the security by providing the legal framework, which is very similar to this which is existing in the European Union. Having a look at the realities in the contracting parties, I think we should recognize the fact that the energy sectors in these countries still are very much affected and shaped by the post-communist legacies. So these energy sectors, or I think in all of the Western Balkans countries for sure, there are many major emitters of carbon emissions and major polluters per capita. If you look at the data, the carbon intensity of the industries are much higher than the average in the European Union. But the problem is that there is a lack of sustained investments in these countries, and this is something which these countries have suffered for a long time, and that is the reason why it resulted in the fact that generation assets we can see right now in the region are aging, and I would say they are reaching the lifetime. And this is, on one hand, this is the very important limitation to the development, but on the other hand, this is also the business opportunity for the potential investors, and I think this is an observation which might be interesting also for the second panel to be recognized. But there are also many other assets, and some of them I would like to underline today. I mean, there is a lot of potential when it comes to energy efficiency, but also is a great potential for renewables, which is being explored right now by some contracting parties. We have today with us Victor from North Macedonia, and he might be willing maybe to share some best experiences, how this process is being organized in North Macedonia, and I would say this is a very good example of how to lead this process of untapping this potential in contracting parties. But still, reliance on fossil fuels for electricity production is very high, but fortunately not on gas. So gas is not existing in the energy mix when it comes to the electricity production. Gas is being used for industrial purposes or for heating purposes in some specific cases in the Western Balkans. So the existing situation, which is very much known in the European Union as the gas prices are making the electricity prices skyrocketing. This is not the phenomena which is existing in the contracting parties of the energy community. Having that in mind, I would say there is another asset which I think is very important. This is the region, or there's the markets which are well interconnected in terms of physical infrastructure, because there was an infrastructure which has been built for one country mainly, and this is something which would need to be explored. Of course, there is a need for more investment on the distribution level. However, I think the main issue is how to ensure that the proper legislative framework is in place to ensure that this asset is being exploited to the utmost. And this is also the way how the energy community could step in that by offering this legal framework for integration of markets And I believe that this year decision of the Ministerial Council expected to be taken in December to adopt the electricity package, which would ensure not only the market coupling for electricity markets within the region, but also between the region and the European Union, is a big opportunity for investors, for business, because that would create enormous liquidity, and we hope that that would be a real breakthrough for the future integration, not only of the electricity market, but also that will be an enabler for a deeper penetration of renewables in this markets. What I would like additionally to underline is the fact that the region is on its way towards decarbonization. You might recall the Sofia Declaration and the commitment, political one, for carbon neutrality. But now we are at the stage of the proper implementation of this political commitment and translation of this commitment to the very specific actions. So last year, the governance regulation has been adopted, and now contracting parties are in the process of preparation of the national energy and climate plans. There is an instrument which is well known also for the European Union countries, and we believe that this instrument could stabilize the process of reforms for years to come. And I think together with the support of the Energy Committee Secretariat, it could be an instrument stabilizing the reform process in the contracting parties. That's why we are very much supporting all of these developments, which would lead the contracting parties to provide us with the first drafts of the NECPs by the mid of the next year, so that Secretariat could make some comments and recommendation, and that would translate into the final version of the NECPs being a reference document for the transition process. The NECPs is, I would say, toothless without proper targets. So we expect this year the Ministerial Council of the Energy Community to adopt targets for renewables, for energy efficiency, and for CO2 emission reductions, and that will be, I suppose, quite ambitious level of targets to be adopted. For example, what is on the table right now, this is 31% for renewables share in energy, and the target for CO2 reduction would be, if accepted, 61%. So this is quite ambitious agenda ahead of us, and we are waiting for political and legal endorsement this year, and we hope that these targets will be something which would create more stability for a reform process in the region. But again, another element which seems to be indispensable in this regard is carbon pricing. And this is discussion which is ahead of us. After the adoption of targets, we can expect the next phase of the stepwise discussion how to make the carbon pricing system in contracting parties paying off the investments in clean energy. And I think this is the very near future, and we hope next year, 2023, will be devoted to progress this discussion as quickly and as efficiently as we can, and we can be much closer to the political discussion and the political decision what kind of carbon pricing mechanism could be endorsed in the contracting parties. And I will stop here, if you would allow me. Just wanted again thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share some information about the recent developments in the contracting parties of the energy community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Artur, and I think we will be happy to come back to you with some questions or comments later on in the debate. But now let me pass on to our second panelist, who is Mr. Václav Bartuška, a long-term ambassador at large at the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Václav prefers to speak later on, perhaps, in the panel.
The latest on the list.
Well, latest on the list doesn't mean the latest in No, Václav, I'm sorry, but this is how we conceptualize the panel. So Mr. Bartuška is the person to speak about energy at the Czech Foreign Ministry for more than a decade and a half by now. Yes, so please.
Good afternoon to all of you. This event is co-organized by the Czech Ministry of Industry and Trade and the Czech Foreign Ministry and the AMO, so thank the organizers for bringing you all here. We played some role in the Czech presidency decision to bring the energy community countries to the informal council tomorrow, which, to be quite honest, wasn't easy. Because as you can understand, Europe is going through a very difficult time, and when you have 27 members in the room who are trying to find unpleasant solutions to difficult problems, the one thing you really don't want in the room is an additional group of people. In the same time, we invited the Ukrainian Minister of Energy to our first emergency session in July. We invited you now to the informal session now in October, because we understand that without you, many of the European solutions would be simply selfish and harming you in the end. So that's why the invitation for your countries to come, both from the Western Balkans and Ukraine and Moldova and Georgia, tomorrow, the all energy committee countries, and Artur will be actually given the floor tomorrow at the council meeting. So we really try to listen to you and to hear you out, because we understand that your situation is, in many cases, actually more complicated than ours. In the end, Europe is in a difficult spot, no doubt. We have to replace plenty of Russian gas and oil and coal and nuclear fuel, but we do have plenty of money. And we do have a relatively strong structure in the EU. It's not the same in many other countries in our neighborhood, I understand. So please do speak tomorrow at the informal council about what needs to be done in your case. As for Europe, the EU talking to you, I think there will be much less lecturing this year than you would usually hear a year ago. Because in most of last years, you'll be told about cutting down the CO2 emissions and getting rid of coal and all of that. You'll probably still hear that, but in the same time, the truth is that Europe, the EU, will have to burn a lot of coal to get through the next couple of winters. It would be hypocritical to not admit that. I think the EU as such, and definitely Germany, definitely this country, we will break probably most of the promises we made in the Paris Agreement and the CO2 reduction, because we simply need to get through the winter. We will not have all the gas we need. We will have to replace it by other fuels, mostly by coal. In the same time, and that's, please do not think that Green Deal is dead. In the same time, the push to replace fossil fuels is now a much stronger political push. It was both mostly environmentalists, think tankers, some green parties. Now it's also a security issue and political issue. The geopolitical risk from oil and gas is clear. We are finding a replacement for 155 BCM of Russian gas, which we imported last year. It was 45% of the European imports of natural gas and 40% of the consumption, 40%. We know that we will not find replacement fast because there's simply not enough gas available in the world. And we do understand that many of the countries we will start to import from will not be easy. Democracies which export oil and gas are very few. You can basically count them on one hand. Norway, Canada, Australia, US, you're basically done. And the rest of the world is sometimes not as friendly as we would like to think. So we will look for solutions. We as the European Union, together with you and others in our neighborhood, we will go through a difficult patch. We will probably have to reassess some of the big words we have made in the past. In the same time, do expect Europe to be in 10 years' time much more green and much more advanced, because simply we will need to get rid of many of the fossil fuels. But for the next couple of winters, do not look too closely at the skies in winter. There might be plenty of burned coal in the air. But don't confuse us. I mean, don't confuse the burning of the coal with the decision we made to get rid of Russia, which is very, very strong on our side. I understand for some of your countries, Russia is a friend. It's really not for us. That's rather blunt. As I understand, I think one of the delegations is not coming to the informal council tomorrow, from what we understand, yeah. One of the countries which is friendly to Russia. So that's all about it from me. There will be much more politics in the energy business in years to come, much more government intervention, much more government decisions. European countries which preached privatization are now buying back their companies. Germany has just bought Uniper recently. France is buying back EDF. My country will probably buy out a couple of companies as well. So less preaching, more listening to you, and hopefully we'll get through it. Thank you.
Thank you, Václav. And having painted a fairly bleak picture, at least for the climate targets, I would like to turn to our Western Balkan colleagues also present at the panel. So first of all, Ms. Frosina Antonovska, who's from Macedonia, North Macedonia herself, but now is working as the policy officer for the Western Balkans at CAN Europe, Climate Action Network. So can you assess where the Western Balkans 6 is standing right now in terms of the targets and the pathways to meet those in terms of the Paris-compatible scenarios? And perhaps also to build up on what Václav has said, can you perhaps paint a bit the picture of the geopolitical interests and the interests of the superpowers and exporters of many critical resources in the Western Balkan countries? And what do you expect the EU to do, or to do more, or to do better to support the Western Balkan countries on their pathways? Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon from my side, and thank you for inviting me to take part in this roundtable discussion and providing space for civil society organizations also to share their messages with regards to energy transition in the Western Balkans. Now, I will follow up first on some of the discussions that were already made, and then I will also answer your questions. So first, I think the key thing that we need to raise as a question is, why do we need the energy transition in the Western Balkans? Thank you. So it's not only, as it was mentioned, because of the climate action that is needed, not only because of the political commitments that we've seen through the NDCs, updated NDCs towards the Paris Agreement, through the Western Balkan Green Agenda, the political commitment that was given, by which actually the Western Balkan region committed themselves to become part of climate neutral Europe by 2050, or the energy community obligations that we have with the decarbonization roadmap, or the other issue that again was raised as a changing circumstances nowadays, the energy security issue. One of the key reasons why we need urgent energy transition in the Western Balkans is because the energy sector in the Western Balkans is actually the key source of pollution. So we have environmental degradation, we have air pollution, which is again affecting the health of the citizens, and of course because of the economic development that is needed. Now, that being said, we heard how we made this political commitment about embracing the Sofia Declaration for the Western Balkans, and we heard how basically EU cannot have the successful EU Green Deal, and this was what the Director Olekowski stated, without the same success by their neighbors. However, although this Western Balkan Green Agenda was embraced, we see the 5 pillars of the Western Balkan Green Agenda: decarbonization, circular economy, biodiversity, food, sustainable food and rural areas, etc. What we do not see, although we had even an action plan last year adopted, what we do not see the institutionalization of this Western Balkan Green Agenda, and we do not see how this fall within the other processes that we have in terms of accession, in terms of revised enlargement methodology, and what was also mentioned, this parallelism in all the different platforms and processes and initiatives actually does not help the process. We do not see the appropriate legislation and structural changes and transformative changes really being able to be monitored. We do not see the necessary funding also given, and we do not see the success that we want to see. Now, we do need bigger efforts. We do need coordinated action by national governments on a regional level, and we also need the EU support to really set these credible climate and energy targets, to really start the energy transition moving now, and we do need the funding for it. What the energy community is doing at the moment with the setting of the headline targets, climate and energy targets, is something that we do recognize, and we hope that in December we're going to see the countries really embrace this raised ambition. We do not know the targets yet per country, how they're going to be and how it will all look like, but we need the setting of these greenhouse gas emissions, renewable energy share and energy efficiency target to be really clear and to be allocated with funding. NSCPs are one way, a tool for achieving that, of course. Now we need these revised NSCPs that we're going to see next June, I guess, by the countries. But the analysis that we've done so far on the NSCPs that are being delivered by Albania and North Macedonia show that first, we do not have credible and clear targets in all countries. For instance, in Albania, we still see projected raise of emissions. We still see in some of the discussions in the drafts that are being developed, we even see now, these are not submitted NSCPs, but the developments and the modeling that is done, we see new coal being built. We see gas infrastructure being supported, which is not calculated in the emissions at the end, so we do not know how that will turn out. And we don't see clear policies and measures and funding for it. Now, we need to move beyond political declarations, what I would say. We need to see more action. And what we see, for instance, with the Western Balkan Investment Framework and the IPA 3 that was announced, is that we're not really sure. It's questionable how much is really coordinated with the climate and energy agenda that we're seeing and that we expect from the Western Balkan countries. Now, I would like to say that this crisis is also an opportunity, because in the Western Balkans, now we have the topics of energy security, energy poverty. We see the resilience of renewable energy sources, and we understand the need for energy efficiency measures. So this is an opportunity, but we do not see that much in action, in actual projects being supported. And another thing that I would like to reiterate is that we cannot forget the just transition challenge. I do not like when we're talking about energy transition and then the just transition is like something on the side that we mention, because if we're talking about just transition, we're talking about just energy transition, and this is something that has to be going in parallel. So we need all stakeholders to be on board from the beginning of the process, and we need funds allocated for that if we do want to see that, because we still have coal-affected communities within the Western Balkan countries, which is not the same as in the EU. And just to answer briefly what you mentioned about the geopolitics in the region. Unfortunately, the long waiting room for the countries in the Western Balkans have provided some space for other political and other geopowers to act. The oil and gas is predominantly owned by Russia, and we don't have only the supply of oil and gas provided by Russia in the region, but we also have actual companies being owned, like Serbia Gas. There are some efforts in order to diversify the energy mix. We can see that, for instance, in North Macedonia, with the investments that were with the interconnection with Greece, with the investments in the Alexandroupolis liquefied natural gas terminal. So this is being supported, and there are efforts to diversify the energy mix. But yes, we do have predominantly gas reliance still by Russia, and we do have Chinese investments, who are the only ones that are still investing in new coal in the Western Balkans. So we need to be careful how we move forward, but as I said, the way forward is the resilience of the renewable energy sources and energy efficiency measures, which need to be more supported, and we're not seeing them in action as much as we see the other policies and measures. Thank you.
And perhaps then to pass on to our last panelist on the notion that you don't see enough institutionalization of the Western Balkan Green Agenda. I think Mr. Mirza Kušljugić could have some ideas about that, being an energy expert himself and a high-profile political figure in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And perhaps if you could also touch upon, Mirza, then the role of the EU energy market and the potential of the integration of the EU energy markets with the Western Balkan ones for fostering the necessary reforms. And potentially also how to move from external incentives, be it regulatory, be it financial, towards internalized ones. How to actually bring this agenda to the fore within the domestic debates in the Western Balkan countries. Please.
Thank you, Thomas. I also thank the Ministry for the invitation and the organizer, AMO, for giving me opportunity to share some of the views. I'm speaking here as the president of the Regional Center for Sustainable Energy Transition, which you should think about as a network of experts from all 6 Western Balkan countries. I'm also, in a way, encouraged by frank address by Ambassador Bartushka, and I will be very frank as well. So, if you ask me the title, Energy Transition of the Western Balkans, Climate Necessity, and a business opportunity, I will say it's political commitment or business opportunity. That's what we have been talking in the region for the last 5 to 6 years. Is it something we must, which is imposed on us, reforms, markets, decarbonization, or it is an opportunity. I personally think it's the second one, but I also think that we have to face the obstacles for the business development, and we have really to evaluate whether we have done everything correctly to eliminate obstacles that the businesses and investments will start. So the second title is the kickstarting of the energy transition in the Western Balkans. The former director of the energy community used to say there are 2 energy transitions, the first one liberalization and the second one forthcoming, decarbonization. And the region will go through both at the same time. You have gone through the first one, stabilized it, and then you have gone, or trying to go through the second one. We have to go through both. Why? Well, because we haven't realized the first one. If you go and look at the energy community tracker, you will see what's the success of the implementation of the acquis. But even more, if you look at the investments in the region for the last couple of years, for the last 10 years, you will see Chinese and Russian investments. You will see very few European investments in the renewable energy sources. And we have to ask ourselves, why is that? So in order to get answers to those questions, we did a survey which was published last year, and it's called Barometer of Countries' Readiness for Sustainable Energy Transition. More than 100 experts participated from Serbia, Montenegro, and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we evaluated internal dynamics. It's very poor. Governments, public electric companies, even citizens, there is no real support and there is no real commitment. And let me be frank, political commitments are just political commitments without any consequences. I'll be just trying to explain to you, because I'm from the region. I talk to these general managers, I talk to these ministers. Look at the LCPD directive. I mean, that was the hard directive imposed and agreed, and implementation. Thanks God we have now a crisis, so we don't have to explain too much why all the countries are not complying with LCPD directive. And the next one, which we will try to get, and I hope it will be get on the Ministerial Council in Energy Community in December, November, we are trying to get emission trading system and CO2 pricing without just transition fund, without knowing how 100,000 people who will, through that mechanism, become unemployed, will be supported. So, Sofia Declaration is a political commitment. Green agenda for the Western Balkans is not Green Deal for the Western Balkans. If you really carefully look at it, that's not that. And I'm really trying to pass the message, which we will, in an organized way, we, the experts from the region, in an organized way, try to formulate through the project that has just started. It is called Repower Western Balkans. It's on the purpose, like Repower EU. How to provide security of supply with the energy transition and based on energy efficiency and renewable energy. But the main message is governments in the region are preoccupied how to survive this year and the next year, and not just with the energy, because that's not so complicated in the region, but with the money, paying the prices which skyrocketed because of the energy crisis in Europe. That's how people see it. Because nothing substantially happened in the region, not really dramatically. But the prices went up that the citizens are now paying for the fuel wood 2 to 3 times more. Of course, we are integrating with the market, and the market is functioning. That, at least that part of the market is functioning. So back to your two questions. The first one, I have been hearing and working on the regional market for the electricity for the last 10 years. And I will tell you an anecdote. The most developed market in the region is SEPEX, Southeast Europe Power Exchange in Belgrade. Even the name was supposed to be regional. Yeah? And when I asked people from the secretariat, from the exchange, why don't you connect? Why don't you connect with the European integrated market like Croatia? He said, we tried. Without that, there is no liquidity. And I said, so what's the problem? We got the answer. Without CO2 pricing, no connection. So market, CBAM, CO2 pricing, energy transition, really, really serious challenges ahead of the region, and the CBAM should be applied in 3 years' time. Do you know what the message will be? We'll take you money from Bosnia and Herzegovina because we are exporting, and we'll not give you that money back. That's why we are advocating for Just Transition Fund, at least from the money from the CBAM, or at least compatible to the level that the other countries in Southeast Europe will get. And I again thank Ambassador Bartushka. Yes, the problem is that there is no structure, and then there is not enough money for the transition. But that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is inside. That's just excuse for those who want the status quo to keep, not to go in the reforms. But that part we have elaborated and written. Everyone who wants to read it can read it, and we can discuss it. Now we are ready to elaborate the whole structure of the EU support for the energy transition in the region, and I hope that in a couple months we'll have the first results. Both projects are supported by European Climate Foundation, and it's not one organization. I just want to say in the first projects was more than 100 experts in the region, and we expect the same number in the second one. So, to answer Thomas, I think we need to rethink all the structure of the support. I know what Secretariat of Energy Community have been trying to get the more stronger mandate for last 6-7 years. Is it possible? How to arrange that? I don't know. That's up to political stakeholders to discuss. But I'm just telling you, experts' view, that unless something is really changed in the structure of the support to the region, the Energy Secretariat, Energy Community Secretariat tracker will be the same. Even maybe we will go back to coal, hopefully not, but that's what's happening in the region. You see the reaction. Germany is going back to coal. And the final line, and the final comment. I hope the second panel will discuss business opportunities for Czech company, for Czech companies. And I hope those will not be business opportunities in the coal industry, because those are the companies we have seen in Bosnia and Herzegovina from your country in the last 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mirza. I do share your hopes. And as was already mentioned, by now, it is only China who is investing in coal capacity, so let's hope it stays that way at least, or even transforms further. But now let's make use of the time we do have, which is around half an hour, a little bit less, and to have a bit of an interactive debate. So we convene this as a roundtable, so it's not only about you asking questions, but also bringing something to the discussion in your own right. But please be brief. If I can ask the colleague to take the microphone, and then you can already either flag your nameplates or just raise your hands, and we will be happy to take your comments or questions.
Hello, my name is Paul Zamysitsky. I'm from the Ministry of Environment. So I'm as well glad to be here and see familiar faces. Yeah, I was involved in one activity of the energy community in Albania. It's like, I don't know, 5, 6, maybe 7 years ago. So, but still I'm trying to track the progress a bit, but maybe I would like to hear from your experts, maybe the current situation, what is the main barrier to access the carbon market in terms of the Western Balkan countries, or what is the progress, maybe if there is any, to create the ETS, or maybe afterwards to join the EU ETS, because yeah, it's serious what you mentioned, that there would be CBAM, let's say, dividing the EU and the Western Balkan and the other accessing countries. So it would be, of course, the problem which would be possible to overcome if something like the carbon market is created, and of course would be the best stimulation for further investment. So if you just a brief question. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we can collect one or two more.
Hi, my name is Morgan Henley. I'm from CE Bankwatch. I work specifically on district heating. And I wanted to ask, because we recently met with the Czech embassy in Sarajevo, which is investing in or helping promote some geothermal district heating in Bosnia. And I just thought this was a very nice, positive example. So I wanted to know if there are any other positive examples of Czech, or maybe you know Mr. Lowski from other Eastern members, which might have a little closer relationship with Western Balkans and maybe Danish or Swedish embassies in the region.
You mean to raise your hand as well? I thought you were on the way to doing that, but that's fine, please.
Thank you. I will spend more than 5 minutes. Because the director mentioned me related to the several activities that we have in our country in the last 3 to 4 years. It's good to be mentioned. I will use one word of the director: proper legislation. 4 years ago, we adopted the new legislation on related to the law on energy, implementing all the directives European as in our obligation. At that time, we promote the premium tariffs as a support scheme for renewable energy storage sources, especially for photovoltaics. And yesterday was the first result, first good result from this activity, proper legislation. We put in operation the biggest solar power plant in the country, 17 megawatts, from European company, which was mentioned here on the panelist, from Slovenia. 17 megawatts is not a very big plant, but compare, when we discussed yesterday with the investor, they said it is the biggest compared to Slovenia. So the result is from the proper legislation is functioning in our country. We have signed agreement for premium tariffs for 130 megawatts in this year and the last year, so half of them are already constructed. Just one comparison number between the former concept of feed-in tariffs. In the last 11 years, we have constructed only 17 megawatts. And for this 17 megawatts, with the concept of feed-in tariff, the consumers are paying 5 million euros per year. Yesterday, plant will receive 250 euros. The premium is 0.01 euros per megawatt hour. And thanks to the competitive process, we received 3 million euros in the budget from the investor. So they paid us 3 million euros to construct the plant. So this is a very positive example. This opened the investors from the region and from Europe the interest to invest in our country. We adopted new legislation related to the strategic investment. This was targeted for the big investors because these were small projects for big investors from Europe. And as the last panelist mentioned, political commitment. This law is some kind of political commitment to the investors. Why? Because in our region, everybody is afraid from the changing in the governments. There are very frequently parties are changing in the government, and they are changing the policies. And you have signed agreement for some investment, new government is coming, this is stopped. With this law, we try to fix this issue. Each investment will receive special law for this investment, and thanks to this, we received applications for more than 1,000 megawatts in big solar plants and big wind plant. Among them, 400 megawatt solar plant, one of the biggest in the region, French investor Aqua Energy. It will be the first project in the region combining energy and agriculture. It will stress the new challenges in the future. And one of the biggest wind farms is wind farm from the German company WPD. For us, this is confirmation that we adopted proper legislation with EU values, and we brought EU investors, because none of these projects, there is no Chinese companies and Russian companies. The biggest project and the most important one for the energy transition will be one pump storage hydropower plant. In these 2 years, we conducted a transparent procedure, and we are evaluating the offer from the Greek state company, which is again European companies. And the most interested bidders was the French EDF, along with the PPC from Greece. For us, again, confirmation of the good policy. And I believe with these projects, we will complete and we will realize our energy transition. You mentioned the 5 pillars. We adopted strategy for energy development until 2040 based on the 5 pillars of EU. And this all documents and all legislation is, the confirmation is the projects, because everybody is seeing this, your determination that you will done the energy transition. The first transition of the coal-fired plant in the region is in North Macedonia, in Oslome. We already constructed there 10 megawatts photovoltaic plant. We signed agreement for public-private partnership with 2 companies from Bulgaria and Slovenia and Turkey. They will construct 100. So in 2 years from now, we will have 120 megawatts that will replace the coal thermal power plant, 120 megawatts. In energy, it's not the same, on the capacity is the same, but this is signal that we can replace the thermal power plants with renewable energy storage sources, and that we can do this just transition. We already started with the support of EU delegation. Detailed action plan is being done for the transition. We have discussion with our neighbors. It is good that this can be supported by the Energy Community Secretariat, like we were doing the project on market integration, to have transition of the countries, EU members with contracting parties of energy community. This will allocate some funds because in the moment you know that we cannot use a lot of funds from EU that are only for the EU members. So at the end, I wrote some comment that in this moment we have two objectives. One is to survive the winter, not just this winter, the next 3 winters. And the other one is to make the energy transition. And this is opposite. Because in the moment we are surviving with coal. And now it is very interesting. 4 years ago we were saying we will make the transition, we will shut down the coal plants. Our biggest challenge is thermal power plant, which is producing 70% of our needs, and we are saying we will shut down in 10 years. And now the opposition and the people are saying, why are we shutting down the plant? Now it's saving our lives and our electricity needs. So we need to, because we mentioned the money for the transition, now we need money for the liquidity. First, for the next 3 to 5 years, we need money for the liquidity to save the energy sector in all countries in the Western Balkans. Secondly, is energy transition. Thank you.
Thanks also for bringing those examples to the table. And I would like to ask my panelists if they wish to complement those or perhaps address the first question then, which is of course also fundamental because it's not only about surviving the next winter, it is also about surviving the alignment with the EU carbon markets.
So if I may, elaborating on that, what has been said by Victor, that really the good legislation is a key factor for bringing investors to the region, and this is the experience we are sharing, and this is something where the energy community is providing the hands-on support for the contracting parties if they're willing to do that, and this is very clear for me. But if you're asking me, because that was the question at the beginning, what the Czech presidency could do for the contracting parties, I would have one very specific issue, which is also very much connected with the way how the investments in the renewables could be de-risked in the region. So under the Czech presidency, probably the compromise will be reached on the changes and amendments of the RED II directive. So there is one provision in this directive which is prohibiting now the European Union to accept the guarantees of origin for renewables issued in the countries which are outside of the European Union, including the contracting parties of the energy community. So we are advocating very heavily, and we are discussing with several stakeholders to allow, under some conditions, to allow that the guarantees of origins to be issued in the contracting parties in the European of the energy community to be tradable within the European Union. That would create an enormous stimulus for the investments, and that would de-risk some investments also in the contracting parties. So if you're asking me, this is a very practical solution which is, I think, in the reach, and this is somehow manageable by the presidency. Of course, that would need some discussion with the European Commission, with other parties, but it also would be a very clear signal of the support of the transition in the EU neighborhood. I would like also make a comment on CBAM, which is really a challenge now for, although being still in discussion, so we are waiting for a final compromise to be reached between the co-legislators in the European Union. However, I would say there are two conditions to be exempt from the CBAM. One is the carbon pricing, and Pavel asked a very right question about what will be the future of that, but I would like also to mention the second one, which is the creation of the well-functioning electricity market, including the short-term markets, intraday market and day-ahead market, and the market coupling, which is the precondition for being exempted from CBAM. And that's what I'm working very hard, for example, with Bosnia and Herzegovina, the only one netto exporter of electricity, which is not willing to, whatever it is, but but this is the country which is not willing to move forward in establishment of the proper organized electricity market. This is, you know, the way I think we could support also Bosnia-Herzegovina in the future to be exempted from CBAM and to allow this exportation to the European Union to be continued, which would create a significant revenues for the energy sector in the country. Otherwise, this money will be taken by the European Union, let's say that way in the general terms, not to make this discussion more complicated, but the price will be paid, whatever will be the decision. And this is the message. But on the other hand, I see there are some positive developments. And again, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, you can see the market incumbent, which is the Elektroprivreda, which has already established the internal system of carbon pricing within the company and is allocating some funds for transitional processes or projects, which I think is a very good example in the case the state is not properly addressing the issues which are raised by the companies. They are understanding that the future and the future for the export from Bosnia-Herzegovina in particular will be somehow endangered in the near future. So I think this is an example of how to collect money within the company, transform this money for projects, including the projects which are connected with the just transition of the coal mining facilities and the coal mining regions. So maybe this is from my side.
Well, we have done analysis of CBAM impact on the region. It's also publicly available, and we identified many challenges. But the key challenge, CO2 pricing makes sense only if you are integrated in EU ETS. I mean, I don't believe there will be regional market. I don't also believe there will be a regional electricity market unless it's connected to the EU. That's my professional opinion. However, there is a need for frank dialogues with local political stakeholders. CO2 pricing is a mechanism to get to net zero, and you start that with announcing the coal phase-out date. And we were trying in Bosnia-Herzegovina 2050, at latest, a little bit. And in Sofia Declaration you have statement, climate neutrality 2050. I wonder how many NECPs will have a date for coal phase out in electricity sector. Okay, we don't have to wait too long. There is no political courage when you face 100,000 employed directly and indirectly in the sector unless you have answer for that. That's the key, and without CO2 pricing, even if we have the market, it will not be coupled fully with the European market. So yes, there was a good momentum before the crisis. Now we have seen again, Pljevlja 2, Bitola, new coal mines, incumbents in the coal industry, or better say, lignite industry, are very strong, still very strong. Now, public opinion regrets why Pljevlja 2 is not built, why Tuzla 7 is not built. Imagine if we had it today. So the first message that at least should come from the European Union is what we know, EU Green Deal is not dead. Repower EU is increasing the speed of the EU Green Deal, and this is not return of the Europe to coal, but in order to encourage political decision makers in the region to make tough decisions. In Serbia they tried, the ministry tried, and when it was faced with the trade unions, with the incumbents, with all the obstacles, it stopped. So I see that as a tipping point. I don't think it could be solved in 6 months, but at least we should really start openly discussing the logic of the change.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions, and then Václav asked for a final comment, which I will happily grant to him, but we only have about 10 minutes left within this panel, so let's still make use of you all experts and excellencies being present here, and feel free. Okay, please. Just to the microphone, please.
The Ambassador of Albania. I had a quick question. We are discussing now the energy independency and also carbon neutrality or EU Green Deal. Is there any priorities set on this? So meaning, are we going to sacrifice, or is Europe planning to sacrifice on the natural and CO2 EU Green Deal in order to have better resources for energy? As you said, we're going to have very bad 2 winters coming ahead of us, 3, even worse. So that's my question.
Any last question from the audience? If not, then please I turn to Václav. Of course you can.
Look, we have spent last 10 years telling you that you should not do any investment in fossil fuels. So let's have a look at the EU emergency councils from the last couple of months. So what did we discuss? Well, common platform for buying of natural gas, building LNG terminals, and finding new sources of LNG around the world, from Africa to Qatar to US to anywhere else. Okay, no more comments. We will manage, and we will, in the end, have the fast transition, but we will have it with plenty of fossil fuels in the meantime, no doubt about it. And on the ownership, which you mentioned here, that Russians own a lot of things in your countries, that might be a good excuse in North Macedonia or in one of your countries. Don't try it here. Because we've been getting rid of Russian investment very heavily for the last 8 months. In this country, we just got rid of the Russians in the nuclear sector. We got rid of them in aerospace. It wasn't always something we should publicize how we did it, but we managed. If you look at Germany, they actually took away from Russia the gas storages in spring, the Gazprom Germania. And just last month, on September 16th, on Friday at 6 o'clock in the morning, Germany took over the largest Russian investment anywhere abroad, the Rosneft ownership in 3 refineries in Germany. Rosneft used to be the 2nd biggest refinery in Germany after Shell. It's no longer. So we are prepared to be actually rather tough on Russia. And if you say that you cannot do that because you have some friendly relations, we will act accordingly. We are on warpath. You should understand that things have changed profoundly. And, we also understand that somebody will be blowing up the pipelines, as they already did. So we are prepared for that. If you're not prepared for that, you will probably not find many willing ears in the EU. As simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you, Václav. And with this, we will be closing this panel, which I think was an excellent one, giving a breadth of perspectives, even though not always the message of hope, but also the message of a reality check, if you will. But I think that's also important for us to have. And in the second panel, then we will look into the specific investment and economic opportunities that are out there, which of course has already been started to some degree within this debate, but we will go into more detail and see how Czech companies can invest in the Western Balkans in a meaningful manner that does not lead to carbon lock-in, but also leads to return on investment. For now, I would kindly ask every single one of you if we could meet up at the terrace right here to take a family picture. And then you are more than invited to have your coffee, which is served in the door in the room on my left side. And we will be starting the second panel at 3:45, moderated by Ms. Aneta Zachová, the editor-in-chief of Euractiv.cz. So please stay with us, but for now, let's meet outside. Thank you very much, and thank you to all the panelists.